In 2003, while stationed on an offshore research platform in the Atlantic Ocean, I recovered the body of a Bigfoot floating in open water dozens of miles from any coastline. What I discovered during the examination of that creature challenged everything I thought I understood about biology, evolution, and the natural world. This is the story I have been afraid to tell for more than 2 decades. But at my age now, I have decided that some secrets are simply too important to take to the grave. Some truths demand to be spoken, regardless of the consequences. My name is Dr. Rachel Thornton. On October 12, 2003, I was 52 years old, working as a senior marine biologist for the Atlantic Coastal Research Institute. My post was Platform Bravo, a formidable research and observation station anchored to the seabed 43 miles off the rugged coast of Maine. For years, Bravo had been my world, a steel island dedicated to unraveling the ocean's mysteries. We studied deep-sea ecosystems that thrived in eternal darkness, monitored the majestic migrations of whales along the eastern seaboard, tracked the powerful oceanographic currents that acted as the planet's circulatory system, and collected a constant stream of environmental data for various federal agencies. My career spanned 28 years of immersion in the marine world. I had published papers on everything from the delicate architecture of deep-water coral formations to the complex, haunting communication patterns of humpback whales. I had studied the ethereal glow of bioluminescent organisms in the mesopelagic zone and charted the epic migration habits of Atlantic bluefin tuna. I had seen things that would fill most people with a lifetime of wonder. Giant squid specimens with eyes the size of dinner plates, rare deep-sea fish that had never before been catalogued, and underwater geological formations that seemed to defy the known laws of physics. But absolutely nothing in my extensive career, nothing in the entire lexicon of biological science as I understood it, had prepared me for what I was about to encounter on that cold October morning. The platform housed a crew of 14 during that particular 3-week rotation. Our small, isolated community consisted of 7 scientists like myself, 5 essential support staff who kept the platform running, and 2 Coast Guard liaisons permanently stationed with us for emergency response and seamless coordination with maritime authorities. Platform Bravo was a substantial structure, 160 feet of steel and concrete rising from the waves, anchored to the ocean floor far below. Its 3 levels housed state-of-the-art laboratories, cramped but functional living quarters for the crew, extensive equipment storage bays, a communication center that was our lifeline to the world, and a helipad on the upper deck for supply runs and, if necessary, emergency medical evacuations. We worked demanding 3-week rotations, 21 days of intense research, isolated from the mainland, followed by a precious week ashore for rest and personal time before returning to the endless expanse of the ocean. It was a rigorous life, a life of isolation, surrounded by nothing but water in every direction, but I had grown to love its rhythm. After so many years, the steady hum of the platform's machinery and the constant presence of the sea felt more like home to me than any house on land. That October morning began like any other on Platform Bravo. I was awake at 5:30, well before dawn, sipping coffee in the main laboratory while I checked the overnight data from the weather station. The fluorescent lights hummed a familiar tune overhead, and through the reinforced windows I could see nothing but an impenetrable darkness over the water, punctuated only by the distant blinking lights of a cargo vessel passing somewhere on the unseen horizon. The forecast was not promising. A significant storm system was churning its way toward us from the northeast, expected to make its presence felt by late afternoon. The computer models, our digital oracles, showed it intensifying as it approached, feeding voraciously off the warm ocean currents that flowed through our research area. We had weathered plenty of storms on Bravo over the years, some of them truly severe, but this one looked different. Based on the rapidly dropping atmospheric pressure readings and the aggressive wind speed projections, it had the potential to be particularly rough. "Rachel, are you looking at these wave height predictions?" a voice called out, cutting through my concentration. It was Dr. Michael Huang, our brilliant and dedicated oceanographer. He was about 15 years younger than me, a specialist in ocean current dynamics and storm surge modeling, and his expertise was invaluable. He was staring at the real-time data, flooding his computer monitor, his expression etched with a familiar concern I recognized from previous storm seasons. "We're going to be dealing with 12-foot swells by 2 o'clock this afternoon, possibly 18 feet by evening if this system intensifies the way the models are suggesting. That's going to make any external operations extremely hazardous." I walked over to his station, setting my coffee mug down on a stack of charts and leaning in to study the data. The satellite imagery was stark. A massive, swirling spiral of clouds was bearing down on us from the northeast. The barometric pressure readings were dropping faster than I liked. My experience screamed at me that there was no room for complacency. "We should secure everything and batten down immediately," I said, making the executive decision my seniority demanded. "Let's get all the external equipment stowed below deck and make sure the backup generators are fully fueled and ready. I want everyone briefed on storm protocols by noon at the latest. There's no point taking unnecessary risks with weather like this approaching." Michael nodded, his focus absolute, and immediately began sending out notifications to the rest of the crew through the platform's internal communication system. Within 20 minutes, the entire platform was a hive of activity, everyone awake and moving with a shared purpose. We all understood that storm preparation was not a drill when you were floating 43 miles from the nearest solid ground. By noon, the sea had transformed from a gentle swell into a churning, agitated mass. The sky had turned a bruised, dark grey that seemed to press down on the water like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The wind was picking up steadily, gusting to 30 knots and climbing, its howl a constant reminder of the power being unleashed around us. We had brought in our floating sensors, retrieved the delicate underwater monitoring equipment that could be damaged by severe wave action, and secured the platform's boats with extra lines and additional anchoring points. The deck crew, led by our unflappable senior deckhand Sandra Kowalski, had been working tirelessly all morning, their movements efficient and practiced, ensuring that nothing would come loose and become a deadly projectile during the storm. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I was in the equipment storage bay on the lower level with Sandra, double-checking the securing straps on some sensitive sonar equipment. The air was thick with the smell of grease and salt. It was then that we heard the radio crackle to life with an incoming transmission, the sound cutting through the rising din of the wind. "Platform Bravo, this is Coast Guard Station Portland. We are receiving reports of debris in the water approximately 3 miles north-northeast of your current position. Can you verify? Over." The voice was professional and clear, despite the growing static from the approaching storm. I exchanged a look with Sandra. She shrugged, already reaching for her bright orange rain gear in anticipation of a possible deck deployment. These kinds of requests were not unusual. Our platform was often the closest manned station to various maritime incidents in this vast stretch of ocean. Lieutenant Amanda Torres, our senior Coast Guard liaison, responded from the communications room 2 levels above us. Her voice, calm and professional as always, echoed through the equipment bay's speaker. "Station Portland, this is Platform Bravo. We will investigate. Visibility is deteriorating with the incoming weather system. What kind of debris are we looking for?" "Over." There was a brief pause before the response came, a moment of static-filled silence. "Unknown at this time. A fishing vessel reported seeing something large floating in the water." The crew thought it might be a whale carcass or possibly shipwrecked debris of some kind. They couldn't investigate further due to the approaching weather conditions and had to return to port. We would appreciate it if you could take a look before the storm makes operations impossible. Over. Lieutenant Torres acknowledged the request without hesitation. Copy that, Portland. We will take a look and report back. Over and out. I was already heading for the stairs when Sandra caught up with me, pulling on her waterproof jacket as we climbed toward the upper deck. The urgency was palpable. Whatever this was, we had a vanishingly narrow window to investigate before the storm slammed the door on any kind of water operation. Every minute counted. 20 minutes later, Sandra and I were standing on the platform's windswept observation deck, binoculars pressed to our eyes, scanning the increasingly rough water to the north. The wind was gusting hard now, maybe 40 knots, as the storm's outer bands began to lash us. A cold, stinging spray from the waves was reaching the deck, a full 45 feet above the waterline. The Atlantic mist coated my face, and I had to wipe my binocular lenses repeatedly to maintain any kind of visibility. The horizon had dissolved into a grey, featureless blur where sky met sea, making the task of distinguishing anything in that churning water more difficult by the minute. "There!" Sandra shouted over the wind, her arm outstretched, pointing toward the northeast. 2 o'clock position, maybe half a mile out. Something dark on the surface. I trained my binoculars in the direction she was indicating and saw it. Immediately, a large, dark mass was floating in the water, rising and falling with the increasingly heavy swells. It was impossible to make out details at this distance, especially with the spray and the deteriorating visibility, but I could tell at once that it was substantial. It was far too big to be a seal, even a large grey seal. The shape was wrong for a whale. It lacked the distinctive dorsal fin or fluke that would identify a cetacean. I lowered my binoculars, my mind racing through possibilities, and looked at Sandra. "Get Lieutenant Torres up here immediately," I said, my voice firm against the wind, "and tell her we might need to deploy the rescue boat. I want Petty Officer Williams up here too. We need to make a decision fast about whether we can safely retrieve whatever that is before the storm makes it impossible." Within 15 minutes, a small team had assembled on the lower deck near the boat launch. Lieutenant Torres, Sandra, Petty Officer David Williams, our other Coast Guard liaison, and myself. The storm was closing in faster than the models had predicted. We had maybe an hour, 60 precious minutes before conditions would be too dangerous for any small boat operation. The swells were already pushing 8 feet and building steadily, and the wind made the platform's rigging sing with a high, mournful sound that experienced sailors knew to respect. "Whatever that is out there, we need to retrieve it now or wait until after the storm passes," Lieutenant Torres said, studying the object through her own binoculars with a practiced, critical eye. She had been in the Coast Guard for 18 years and had conducted more search and rescue operations than anyone else on the platform. Her judgment on matters of maritime safety was something I trusted without question. But if it's a body, whether human or animal, it might not still be there after the storm moves through. These swells could push it miles away or submerge it entirely. I made the decision quickly, knowing that hesitation would only cost us our window of opportunity. "Let's go," I said, with the authority that came from being the senior scientist on the platform. "But we do this fast and safe. The first sign that conditions are too dangerous, we abort immediately and return to the platform. No retrieved specimen is worth risking lives. Is everyone clear on that?" Everyone nodded in grim understanding. We began the launch sequence for the platform's rigid hull inflatable boat, or RHIB. It was a 28-foot vessel with powerful twin outboard motors, designed specifically for this kind of operation in rough conditions. Sandra, an expert coxswain, maneuvered us away from the platform's lee side, and the boat immediately began slamming through the waves as we headed toward the floating object. As we got closer, fighting through a constant curtain of spray that drenched us repeatedly, and waves that tossed the boat around like a child's toy, I could see the object more clearly. It was definitely biological. I could see what appeared to be hair or fur, dark brown or possibly black, matted and waterlogged from its time in the ocean. My first logical thought was that we had found a bear, perhaps a black bear, that had somehow, impossibly, ended up in the ocean miles from shore. It wasn't unheard of for bears to swim considerable distances, but 43 miles was beyond any reasonable possibility. Still, my mind desperately searched for explanations that fit within the established framework of the natural world. "Looks like a dead bear," Lieutenant Torres called out over the roar of the engines and the howling wind. "Maybe fell off a boat or a barge or something." "Maybe," I responded, but a cold knot was tightening in my gut. Something was telling me that what I was seeing did not match the body structure of any bear I had ever studied. Even at this distance, even through the driving spray and rain that was now falling in sheets, the proportions seemed wrong. The limbs appeared too long, the torso too humanoid in its shape. But I pushed those thoughts aside as impossible, a trick of the light, telling myself that the rough conditions and poor visibility were distorting my perception. Sandra maneuvered the boat with incredible skill, approaching from downwind to avoid being pushed onto the floating mass by the powerful waves. As we pulled up alongside the body, I got my first clear, unobstructed look at it, and my breath caught in my throat. Time seemed to stop for a moment, a bubble of silence in the chaos of the storm, as my brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. It was not a bear. There was no possibility, not even a remote one, that what I was looking at was any species of bear or any other animal I had ever encountered in 3 decades of marine biology research. The body was massive, floating face down in the churning grey water. I could see arms, long, powerfully muscled arms that ended in hands. Not paws, but hands with 5 distinct fingers. The hair covering the body was thick and matted, clearly natural and not any kind of artificial covering, but the body structure beneath that hair was completely wrong for any known animal in the scientific record. It was humanoid. It was bipedal. It was something that should not exist. "What the hell is that?" Lieutenant Torres said, her professional composure cracking for the first time since I had known her. She was staring at the body with an expression of utter disbelief, her eyes wide behind her rain-spattered safety glasses. "I don't know," I replied, my voice a hoarse whisper. My scientist's brain was already trying to catalogue what I was seeing, even as my rational mind screamed in protest, rejecting the impossible implications. Every piece of training I had ever received, every paper I had written, every accepted truth about biology and evolution, all of it was being challenged by what was floating in the water next to our boat. "But we need to get it aboard immediately. Sandra, bring us closer. David, help me with the recovery gear. We cannot leave this here to be lost in the storm." Getting the body into the boat was one of the most physically demanding things I have ever done. The creature weighed at least 500 pounds, possibly more, and the rolling waves made every movement treacherous. We used heavy-duty cargo straps and the boat's small winch system, working together with a desperate, frantic coordination to roll the massive form over the gunwale. Cold seawater sloshed into the bottom of the boat as the weight came aboard, and Sandra had to adjust the trim immediately to compensate. My muscles burned with the effort, and I could see the same bone-deep exhaustion etched on the faces of Lieutenant Torres and Petty Officer Williams. But finally, After what felt like an eternity of struggle against the storm and the impossible weight of the thing we had found, we had it secured in the bottom of the boat. And now that it was aboard, now that I could see it clearly despite the rain and spray, I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that this was not any animal that existed in the zoological record. The body was over 7 feet long, covered from head to foot in thick, dark brown hair that was matted with seawater but was clearly natural, growing from the skin just as hair grows from any mammal. The face was partly submerged in the water sloshing in the boat's bottom, but I could see enough to know that it was neither fully human nor fully ape. The brow ridge was prominent, the jaw heavy and powerful, but there was something in the structure of the skull that suggested an intelligence beyond any known primate. The hands were remarkable, with 5 fingers and what appeared to be fingernails rather than claws, thick and yellowish, but distinctly different from the claws of a bear. The feet were massive, easily 18 inches long, with a distinct heel structure and toes that looked capable of gripping rough terrain. "Platform Bravo. This is rescue boat," Lieutenant Torres radioed back to the platform, her voice shaky in a way I had never heard from her before. "We have recovered the object. It is biological in nature, unknown species. We are heading back to the platform immediately. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. Have the medical bay prepared for examination. Over." There was a pause before the response came, and I could hear the confusion and disbelief in the voice of whoever was on communications duty. "Copy that, rescue boat. Medical bay will be ready. What do you mean by unknown species? Over." Lieutenant Torres looked at me, and I could see the same world-shattering question in her eyes that was burning in my own mind. What exactly had we found? What impossible thing had the Atlantic Ocean given up to us on this stormy October afternoon? "Unknown at this time," she finally responded, her voice strained. "We will brief everyone when we get back. Just have everything ready. It is large. Over and out." The return trip to the platform was even rougher than the outbound journey. The swells were pushing 10 feet now and building toward the 15-foot range Michael had predicted. The boat crashed through them with bone-jarring impacts that made conversation impossible. Spray and rain drenched us continuously, and the body slid around in the bottom of the boat despite the straps we had secured around it. Every few seconds, I found myself glancing down at it, half expecting to discover that I had imagined the whole thing, that it would resolve itself into a bear or a large seal or something else that made sense within the framework of known biology. But every time I looked, it was still there, still impossible, still real. By the time we reached Platform Bravo and maneuvered into position to be hoisted back aboard, we were all exhausted, soaked to the bone, and shivering with a cold that went deeper than the Atlantic water. The deck crew was waiting, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. The crane operator was already swinging the lift basket into position to bring us and our impossible cargo up to the platform deck. Michael and the other scientists were waiting on the deck when we finally arrived. When they saw what we carried on the stretcher we used to transport the body, the looks on their faces mirrored exactly what I had felt when I first saw it clearly in the water. Shock, disbelief, and beneath it all, the unmistakable, irrepressible spark of scientific fascination that drove all of us to choose this profession. "Rachel, what is that?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible over the wind that was now howling through the platform's superstructure. He was staring at the massive, hair-covered form on the stretcher with an expression of complete incomprehension, his scientific training clearly at war with what his eyes were seeing. "I don't know yet," I replied honestly, my mind already shifting into professional mode. "But we need to get it into the examination bay immediately. And Michael, I need you to document everything. Photographs from every angle, measurements, tissue samples, everything you can think of, because I am not certain anyone is going to believe this without extensive, meticulous documentation. Whatever this is, it needs to be studied properly. We moved the body into the largest storage bay on the platform, which we quickly converted into a makeshift examination area. I had conducted necropsies on whales, dolphins, sharks, and countless other marine animals. I had published papers on specimen examination techniques, but this was completely different. This was something that, according to everything I had ever been taught, simply should not exist. As the storm battered the platform outside, shaking the entire structure with the force of the waves, I stood over the body and began my work. The hands alone were remarkable. 5 fingers on each, with proportions similar to human hands but scaled up dramatically. The palms were leathery and black, with deep creases that reminded me of forensic palm prints. The feet were even more impressive, clearly designed for bipedal locomotion, with a heel structure and toe arrangement distinctly different from any ape. The face, now that I could examine it under the bright lights, was deeply unsettling. It was not human, not exactly, but there was an undeniable echo of humanity in the bone structure. The brow ridge was heavy, sheltering deep-set eyes that were closed in death. The nose was broad and flat. The jaw was powerful, with a chin more pronounced than I would have expected, and when I carefully opened the mouth, I found teeth that combined human-like molars with canines larger than any human would possess. Based on my experience with marine specimen recovery, I estimated it had been in the cold water for perhaps 24 to 48 hours, which had helped preserve it. For the next 6 hours, while the storm raged, I conducted the most thorough examination of my life. Michael documented everything, his hands shaking slightly, but his scientific focus unwavering. Lieutenant Torres maintained a detailed log. The creature was male, approximately 7 feet 3 inches tall. The hair covering its body was a deep chocolate brown, with some grey visible near the temples, suggesting maturity. The musculature was extraordinary, far denser than any humans, built for power and survival in harsh terrain. I collected tissue samples, blood samples from the heart, hair, and skin. The internal examination revealed a heart nearly twice the size of a human's, massive lungs, and a digestive system suggesting an omnivorous diet. The brain was the most remarkable finding. It was perhaps 20% larger than a human brain by volume, with a highly developed cortex. This was not the brain of a simple ape. It was the brain of a creature with the capacity for complex thought, planning, and perhaps even language. But the most startling discovery came when I examined the skull more closely. There, on the right side of the cranium, partially hidden by the thick hair, was an old wound. A hole in the bone, the diameter of a pencil, with edges that had healed over time, showing years of bone regrowth. This creature had been shot. Years ago, probably decades, something had put a bullet through its skull, and it had survived. The implications sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the storm. If this creature could be shot, then someone knew these things existed. And if there was one, there were probably more. By 3 in the morning, the storm had begun to subside. I had been working for nearly 14 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the adrenaline of discovery. At some point, I made a decision that would shape the next 2 decades of my life. I began to write up my findings in the format of a scientific paper, knowing that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. By sunrise on October 13th, the storm had passed, leaving behind a calm ocean. I sent my preliminary report, including photographs and my initial observations, to the Institute's headquarters in Woods Hole via secure satellite communication. I requested a helicopter to transport the body for more detailed analysis. The response I received was not at all what I expected. It came within 3 hours, not from my superiors, but from an unknown source using security protocols I had never seen. The message was brief and absolute. I was ordered to cease all examination, secure all samples and documentation, and speak to no one. A helicopter was being dispatched, not from the Institute, but to take custody of the specimen and all related materials. I didn't understand, but the tone of the message conveyed an authority that was not to be questioned. The helicopter arrived just after 2 o'clock that afternoon. It was a large, unmarked military transport. 6 people emerged, 4 in military-style uniforms with no insignia, and 2 in civilian clothing who moved with an air of command. One of the civilians, a tall man in his 60s with sharp, assessing eyes, approached me. "Dr. Thornton," he said, offering a firm handshake. "I am James Whitfield. I am here on behalf of a joint federal task force. We need to have a conversation about what you found yesterday. And I need you to understand that everything you are about to learn is classified at the highest possible level. Your cooperation is not optional." And that was how I learned that I was not the first person to discover what the world called Bigfoot. The United States government had known about these creatures for more than 50 years and had been operating a classified program to monitor them, study them, and keep their existence an absolute secret from the public. Whitfield, a former CIA officer, spent the next 4 hours briefing me. The government's knowledge dated back to the 1940s. A small but persistent population of these creatures lived in the most remote wilderness areas of North America. They were intelligent, elusive, and used simple tools. Early attempts to capture a living specimen had failed completely. The most shocking revelation was their population size. Based on decades of monitoring, Whitfield explained, there were fewer than 300 of these creatures left in all of North America. And the number was declining. They were being pushed toward extinction by habitat loss, accidental killings by hunters, and the fact that their low reproductive rate couldn't offset the losses. The program's mission, he explained, was twofold. First, to study them as thoroughly as possible before they disappeared forever. Second, and most importantly, to protect them from public discovery. The program's founders believed that if the public learned Bigfoot was real, thousands of people would flood the forests with guns, eager to bag the ultimate trophy. The species would be wiped out within a decade. So, the government had decided to keep them a secret. Every sighting was investigated and suppressed. Every piece of physical evidence was seized. Scientists who got too close were recruited and sworn to secrecy. Those who refused faced consequences Whitfield only hinted at. I was given a choice: join the program and accept the secrecy, or face criminal charges, the destruction of my career, and imprisonment. It was no choice at all. By sunset, I had signed a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and watched as Whitfield's team carefully packaged the body we had recovered and loaded it onto their helicopter, bound for a facility whose location I was not yet authorized to know. The next 22 years of my life would be defined by that decision. The program was headquartered in a clandestine facility in rural Vermont, disguised as a forestry research station. 3 months after my discovery, I was transferred there. The facility was run by Dr. Patricia Morrison, a brilliant woman in her late 60s who had been studying these creatures since the 1970s. She became my mentor and my friend. The facility housed an incredible collection of evidence: 3 complete skeletal specimens, thousands of hair samples, footprint casts, and hours of video recordings from hidden cameras. And there were the samples from the body I had recovered. The DNA analysis took months, but the results changed everything we thought we knew about human evolution. These creatures were not apes. They were hominids, part of the same evolutionary line that produced modern humans. They had diverged from our line between 1 and 2 million years ago, evolving in parallel. They were not our ancestors. They were our evolutionary cousins. The program called them Homo silvestris, man of the forest. This was proof that modern humans were not the only surviving species of the genus Homo. Another had been living alongside us all along, hidden in plain sight. Over the following years, I became deeply involved in the research. We studied their physiology, their behavior, their complex vocalizations that suggested a form of language, and we watched helplessly as their numbers continued to dwindle. By the time I joined in late 2003, the population was around 300. A year later, 280. 5 years later, 240. The decline was slow but relentless. We pieced together the story of the creature I had found, whom we called Atlantic One in our records. He had been an older male, living his life in the forests of northern New England. The healed bullet wound in his skull was a testament to his resilience. In his later years, as his habitat shrank, he had begun scavenging for food near human settlements. He likely ate contaminated garbage, which made him sick, weakened and delirious. He had wandered to the coast, where the storm surge swept him into the ocean, and he drowned. He had survived a gunshot to the head, only to be killed by a piece of tainted food from a dumpster. His story was a microcosm of his species' tragic fate. In 2018, the incident that broke me occurred. A group of hikers in the Olympic Peninsula captured several minutes of clear video footage of a family group. The program moved swiftly to suppress it, discrediting the footage as a hoax and paying off the hikers. But I had seen the original video. I recognized the female. She was an individual we had been tracking for years, watching genuine, undeniable proof of her existence be turned into another Bigfoot joke. While her species slid toward oblivion, shattered my faith in the program's mission. Secrecy was not protecting them. It was erasing them. From that day forward, I began to prepare. I secretly copied documents, data, and photographs. I planned for the day I would break my silence. Dr. Morrison sensed the change in me. The policy comes from the highest levels, she warned me. The penalties for disclosure are severe. Don't throw away everything you have built. But I knew I could no longer be complicit. I retired in 2022. By then, the population had dropped below 100. I moved to a small coastal town in North Carolina, trying to find peace, but I could not forget. In January 2025, I sat down and began to write this account. I know what the consequences will be. The federal government will come for me. I will face criminal charges. I may spend the rest of my life in prison. I will lose my pension and my reputation. But I cannot go to my grave carrying this secret while the last of these magnificent beings disappear from the earth, unknown and unmourned. There are fewer than 80 of them left. In another decade, they will be extinct. Secrecy has failed. It is time to try something different. I am releasing this story along with the evidence I have collected. Photographs from Platform Bravo, initial measurements and copies of population data. I am providing everything needed to prove that what I am saying is true. Will this trigger the hunting frenzy the program always feared? Possibly, but they are being hunted anyway, killed by accident and by habitat loss. At least now, their deaths will not happen in secret. If they are to go extinct, let the world know what it is losing. And maybe, just maybe, public awareness will generate the pressure needed for real protection. To the federal agents who will come for me, I am not hiding. I live at 1847 Soundview Lane, Cedar Point, North Carolina. I'm ready to face the consequences. To the scientists who will read this, demand access to the classified materials. Verify my claims. The truth is there, waiting in a secure facility in Vermont. To the conservation groups, I am including the locations of the remaining family groups. They need protection now. They are in the Green Mountains, the White Mountains, the Adirondacks. They are out there, and they are running out of time. And to anyone who might think of going into the forest with a gun, I beg you, do not. They are not monsters. They are intelligent, sentient beings. If you see one, leave it in peace. We have already taken so much from them. I do not know if this revelation will save them or doom them, but I know that silence was not working. At least now, the world will have a choice. The body we pulled from the ocean that day changed my life. It showed me a wonder beyond imagination and burdened me with a secret I can no longer keep. I spent 22 years respecting that secret, and in that time, the species declined by more than half. It is time for the world to know. I am old now, and I may not live to see the outcome of this decision. But for the first time in over 2 decades, I feel I am doing the right thing. Some truths are too important to die in silence. Some species deserve to be known, even if we failed to save them. Their story deserves to be told, and now it has been. The rest is up to you.